Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start the session now. My name is Dr. Richard Devey, and I'm going to be the facilitator for this course. Can you just let me know if you can hear me via the chat? Oh, okay. Good. There's a thumbs up. Um, right. I'm not going to keep my camera on just for bandwidth, just in case it burns up my laptop. So I'm going to put the camera off you so you can see who I am. I do exist. And as I mentioned, I'll be your facilitator for this course. I'm just going to put that off and I'm going to share a presentation. All right, the course that we're doing, can you just let me know if you can see my screen? I see a PowerPoint on the screen. Yep, great. Okay. So the session this afternoon is the first session of the supervising quantitative research design, and I'm just going to move that on. So just some online housekeeping. I think it's best to keep videos off, just in terms of data costs and also keep microphones off to prevent background interruptions. It's great to see people's faces, but you're not required to keep your videos switched on. If you want to show yourself, you're welcome to. And then if you need to talk during the session, just remember to unmute your microphone and then remute it when you finish speaking. If somebody else is speaking and you want to ask a question, just use the thumbs up, or sorry, hands up. And then if I can't see it while I'm presenting, then just unmute and say that you have a question, for example. Okay, if you're taking too long to make a point, we might interrupt you, and then but you're not allowed to do that to us. And I'm just joking. And then if you've got a problem accessing Teams or your system stops working, you should the session will be recorded, so you should be able to access a recording of the session. And just hopefully that won't happen, but it can happen that one's computer or laptop breaks down or something during the session, and then in which case there should be a recording. And then just a final point, you're welcome to ask questions during the sessions. So if you have a question or you need clarification, you're welcome to ask or put it in the chat, and then I'll catch up with the questions a bit later. Okay, so the course is kind of roughly grouped into three sessions or three sections. The first, and I've kind of divided it into early, middle, and sort of later phases of the research journey of the student. So this unit one is going to focus on the early phase or unit one of the program focuses on the early phase of quantitative research design, and that's when the student begins to develop their research project, and it's during the conceptualization of the project that we'll be focusing on in the early phase of in contact sessions 1 and 2, which is covering unit 1. Okay, the session today, hopefully this will be the agenda. I want to start with a brief welcome and introductions. Then I'm going to talk very briefly about the module. Then I also want to talk to you about assignment 1. Then we might take a short break. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the philosophy of research, and then we're going to do what will be hopefully a fun exercise on supervisor-student fit, and then if there's time at the end, a Q&A. We don't have a lot of time this evening, but so let's see what we can get through, but hopefully we'll be able to get through all the material. So just to begin with, just to introduce you to myself, I'm Dr. Richard Devey, and I run the Statistical Consultation Service at UJ. In that role, we consult with students about their research design, and we obviously focus on quantitative designs because we are a statistical consultation unit. So usually if the person's using statistics, they'll be doing a quantitative project. And yeah, so, and my academic background is I started as a scientist. So I studied biology up to master's level, and then I changed to social science at master's and at PhD level. So I have experience in both science and social science. And I'll come back to that a bit later during the session. So I'd like a couple of you to introduce yourselves. I don't think everybody's online, so I'm not going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, but if I call your name, can you just unmute and answer the following questions? What is your name? What is your discipline? What is your area of research? What is one expectation that you have for the module? What is one thing that you find most difficult about supervising students? And if you think about your past or your current supervisor, what is one possible lesson that you learned from them? Okay, so I'm just going to call out surnames. And as I say, I'm not going to call everybody this afternoon. We'll cover, it's a big group, so we could spend 2 hours introducing ourselves. I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to call a few of you this afternoon and then the rest of you on Saturday. So Adeko Maya, are you present? And if you are, can you tell us who you are and what your discipline is and so on?
Okay, good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Victoria Dekomaya. I just finished my PhD, but my discipline is on management. My PhD is based on business management, and my area of research is on SMS, entrepreneurship, HR, and family businesses. What I'm expecting from this model is that I'm a qualitative person. I'm good in qualitative, but I want to do more in quantitative. So that is the main reason why I picked up this program. And I'm finding it difficult, but I believe once I launch into this program, I will get it right. And one thing I love my past supervisor on is that is the quantitative supervisor is good in quantitative, and I want to learn more about quantitative. So when I heard about this program, so I picked my interest in the quantitative research part so that I can learn more positive aspects of it. So that is what I'm expecting from this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Chiwarawara. Okay, let's move on. Gumedi, Al Gumedi, Lindiwe. Lindiwe, are you there? Yes, Sipo.
I'm happy to step in for those who are still trying to find their feet.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah, that's fine. Okay, thanks, Tony. Yeah, okay.
okay, my name is Tony Shabangu, and I'm from the Department of Philosophy. My area of research is within ethics. I work within the area of Ubuntu primarily. My expectations for this module is actually to be surprised, because I have no idea what happens within the quantitative space, because I'm very much focused in more qualitative research, if you want to call it that. So I'm expecting also a lot of work. I assume quantitative research is a lot of work. What is the one thing I find most difficult about supervising students? I really think motivation is something which is very difficult to get within the students. You can teach them how to write, you can teach them how to read critically, but to motivate them to want to do those things is the most difficult. And I enjoy it when I do succeed. And when I think about past supervisors and current supervisors, the most positive lesson I've learned is that I really have to understand the process of getting up and trying again over and over again, and express that to the student in a way that they understand that we are not here to beat them up when we give them feedback. We're not here to make them feel bad, but rather it's a learning how to, crawl then walk, then you will fall a lot of times. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. Right. I think I'm just going to ask people who are here. So, Dr. Lawrence.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So my name is Andret Lawrence. I am from the health sciences background, more specifically emergency medical care. So I'm a paramedic. So my area of research and for my PhD was related to pre-hospital acute pain management. I expect of this module, so most of my research that I do is within quantitative research. So I think I just expect to learn more tricks and tools to support students in their journey in conducting quantitative research. One thing at the moment that I find most difficult with students is language. So when I started this journey, I was working in Namibia. I'm South African, but I was working in Namibia, but I very recently moved to the UAE. So the language barrier between myself and Arabic students is quite interesting at the moment. And then finally, one of my supervisors were very motivating, and I think I can sort of learn a bit how to be more motivating to students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nicolene Uester.
Good afternoon. So quite rightly, I am Nicolene Uester. My discipline is human anatomy, and I specifically research in the field of forensic anthropology. I do a little bit of scholarship of teaching and learning as well, but my main area of interest is forensic anthropology. So basically looking at what types of answers we can get from a skeleton to be able to answer medical legal questions. My expectation for this module might be a little bit on a tangent. So my discipline, because of the legal aspects of my discipline, is actually there are usually very advanced quantitative expectations. And sometimes they are very specialized. So some of the more specialized techniques, it's not always easy to find assistance for students who are in need of specialized techniques for their statistical analysis. So I am on the lookout for something that will help me help the students when specialized techniques rears their head, especially because the discipline usually is also very fast moving. So there's very frequently additional techniques that come on board that are, it didn't used to be there, and then all of a sudden everyone's using it, and then students need to cope with that. The one thing I find most difficult about supervising students is a bit of an ironic one. I like to take my time with research. I like to think about research, but the thing I find most frustrating is when students do the exact same to me. So that's an ironic one. And then something I have positive lessons from supervisors is perseverance, especially in the face of the unknown. As I mentioned, very specialized statistical analysis in my field. For my PhD, I needed to basically investigate very specialized analyses, and I could get no one to help me. So I basically had to teach myself, and perseverance was something that I found crucial in that journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting. Yeah, thanks. So maybe we can talk about, so I won't be covering specific sort of statistics in any detail in the module, but I'd be interested to know when you talk about specialist or new techniques, what they are. And if depending on what they are, I might be able to advise you in terms of or point you in directions of resources that might be able to help you depending on what they are. So one of the problems we face as consultants is that there's so many statistical procedures out there and so many designs out there that you can't possibly know them all. So at some stage you might need to find a specialist who knows about it, and it might so it's an interesting problem that but we can sort of maybe re-engage with that a bit later.
I look forward to discussing.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Asma Shaikeda.
Good afternoon, all. So my name is Asma Shaikeda, and I am from the Department of Human Anatomy and Physiology at UJ. Currently, the research that myself and my students are focusing on is looking at the effect of photobiomodulation, which is the effect of LEDs or laser on diabetic wound healing in an animal model, and specifically we are looking at a zebrafish model. One expectation that I have from this module is a lot of our research is quantitative, so I just want to gain a little bit more knowledge on how to better guide my students, because already from the proposal stage, they already need to be thinking about how they're going to collect data and analyze the data. One thing I find most difficult about supervising students is also motivating my students. Both my students are currently part-time, and the research is progressing very slowly. So it's very difficult to keep them motivated and to let them know that sometimes things can go wrong in research and we just need to find an alternative. And it's just difficult to keep them enthusiastic about the project. And when I think about my past supervisor, the thing or the one positive lesson that I learned from her was that she was very approachable and very honest, and just being approachable made it easy for me to go to her with anything. And even if I felt that it was something that I was doing wrong, just getting the guidance from her really, really helped me to progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So just in terms of slow students, we in the postgrad school, we one of the sort of issues that we need to focus on is throughput rate. So how fast the student finishes their qualification. But I didn't finish any of my degrees on time, so I'm a bad example for throughput. So, and I know I was working when I was doing my studies, so I understand what it's like being a student when you're working and trying to study at the same time. Some people are very efficient at getting through, and other people not so much. Okay, so Jonas Mathabathaba.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Jonas Matawata. I come from the discipline of supply chain management. My area of interest is disruptive supply chains and the servitization of manufacturing. So, what is one expectation am I having for this module? Well, I come from qualitative background, so I kind of want to pursue my PhD with mixed method approach. So I kind of thought I would want to use the module to learn more as I prepare for that journey. What's one thing you find the most difficult about supervising students? I don't have that experience as yet. So when you think about your past supervisors, I think the patience that they had in me, even when I don't get it all, it's one thing I will never forget. So I think even when you keep falling, not getting it, and they are patient to help you through. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. We've got Masatuka's AI note taker. Is there a person behind that, or it says it's an AI note taker? I think we're not supposed to have these note takers on, or AI on the group. So maybe we need to talk about that. Right. Tony, we've had you. Chandra.
Hi, Doc. Okay, I'm Chandra. My discipline is in clinical sciences and immunology, but since I've moved to UJ, I've recently been supervising some chemical sciences students, and basically on projects that develop electrochemical sensors for different infectious diseases. Right now, I'm currently working on HIV. So for my expectation of this module, it's basically to expand my supervision skills for quantitative research in other fields, I guess, or learn how to adapt it to these other fields. Since I think Nicolene also mentioned that in like health sciences, it's very specialized and you already know your quantitative methods, but then you start delving into other fields and then you need to supervise these students. So the one thing I find most difficult about supervising students, I guess it would be a communication issue. You might think that you giving correct, I'd like to say guidance, but interpretation from a student might be different. So this would also apply with the quantitative aspect. And when I think about my past supervisors or current supervisors, the positive lesson I learned from them, well, my last supervisor taught me that there's no stupid question. And it's always good to ask rather than trying to take on everything by yourself. And that's me.
Thank you. Thanks. Lindiwe, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Doc.
Yes, hi, how are you?
I'm good. I can't complain. My name is Lindiwe Gumete. The discipline that I'm in the health sciences, and the department is medical imaging and radiation sciences, specifically in the discipline diagnostic radiography, because there are different disciplines within the department. The area that I'm focusing on currently, I'm supervising students that have that are working on topics that are focused specifically on diagnostic radiography, so they vary. However, my PhD was in health sciences in general, focusing on patient communication and disclosure, and it included an element of traditional medicine. So it was somehow a complicated topic, but I managed well with it. What is one expectation for this module? For this module, I think some of the speakers have mentioned that in health sciences, we are more familiar with qualitative research, but we do work with quantitative research, and I find myself struggling a lot, not even a bit, especially when I'm supervising. I'm on my second student who's doing a research using a quantitative methods. So I'm hoping I'll learn a lot in order to improve my supervision. What is the one thing you find most difficult about supervising students? Time management, especially the young ones, and also the international students. Communication also is an issue. Responding to emails, they expect that when they send you something, you respond immediately. They will even send you an email to check, did you receive? But their response is almost always delayed. When you think about either your past supervisors or current supervisors, so both for my master's and my PhD, I had the same supervisors. I had a wonderful journey, both inspiring women who have climbed the ladder. They are consistent. They are great team players. They pushed me, they helped me, they were like my sisters. So I would like to be a supervisor like them if I'm currently not at that level yet. So I really enjoyed my journey in both my master's and my PhD under their supervision. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lindiwe. Thank you. Yeah. I think that point about the experience that you have with your supervisor and how that then influences how you supervise is very important. And I think during the program, I'll try and share with you some of the experiences that I've been very lucky to have 3 or 4 very good supervisors in my academic career. And that sort of, I think, helps you in terms of how you develop your own sort of skill as a supervisor or as an advisor to students. Okay, I'm going to stop there with introductions, and the rest of the group, I'll ask you to introduce yourselves on Saturday when we've got a bit more time. So you will have your turn. I want to get to know you and what you're doing. So I'll follow up with that on Saturday. Thank you for all your contributions, those of you that have introduced yourself. So we just to make a point about your background. So there's people from different backgrounds in the group, and I'm going to try and sort of it's difficult to include everybody in examples because we're coming from different backgrounds in terms of discipline, but a lot of the quantitative the ideas around quantitative supervision will apply to everybody, irrespective of which discipline you come from. So one of the points about a lot of the references that I use are more social science than science, because that's the most recent sort of field that that I was working in myself. But it doesn't mean that those principles don't apply to a scientific study as well. So let's but I'll try and introduce different levels of discipline or different disciplines as we go through using examples. Okay, so just a quick introduction to the module. This module is part of a broader program of modules which relate to supervision. So I think some of you might be registered for some of the other modules or have completed some of the other modules. So there's current and emerging issues in supervision, the supervision of qualitative research design. There's assessment and ethics. So those are different modules that are run on the program. This is one of those components. And this conceptualization of the module combines elements of quantitative research design and the process of supervising. So the module doesn't focus on quantitative methodology or quantitative design in terms of you learning about it, although you should learn about it. So as a supervisor, you need knowledge of quantitative research if you're supervising quantitative research, but you also need to evaluate the work that students are doing. So there's two components, and if you think about what a supervisor is, I would say they play three roles. One is as a sort of expert in a field, and that's not just the subject field, it's also the methodological field. It's also as an evaluator or a reviewer, where you are critiquing a student's work to give them feedback on how to improve it. And then there's also the role of it's almost a mentoring role, where you it's more to do with the admin, or sort of getting the student through the process. So a number of you mentioned motivating a student. So that's not necessarily part of the subject matter that they're doing or the methodology they're using. It's just getting them to be able to get through the process of doing the research. But this module is mainly focused on the research design and on what sort of tools you can try and use to support the student when they're doing a quantitative project. But I'm also going to try and give you some ideas about how you can motivate students to get through their qualification. So I've got a couple of ideas around that, based on my own experience of of being in charge of a program of postgrad students, and then also participating in a program where postgrad students which was used for postgrad students, and that I think that was quite successful in terms of providing support. So we'll talk about those later. So the program is designed, I'm using this research journey as a structure for the module. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got three main components, which is so the student goes through this journey, and as a supervisor, you need to support them throughout the journey from the beginning to the end, unless they have a change in supervisor, which hopefully won't happen. It does happen sometimes. Sometimes supervisors leave. Sometimes you can't get on with a student, or the student can't get on with you, and that leads to sort of the student moving to a new supervisor. But these I don't think that happens very often. And so basically you in it for the journey. And the structure is around three sort of phases or stages of the research. So the first part is the early stage, which is the conceptualization and theorizing of the problem. and then deciding on the research methodology and the research strategies which are going to be used. And then the middle stage is more about measurement and how operationalizing the variables that you're going to be measuring in the study, and then also a discussion about validity and reliability. So when you're doing quantitative research, two of the kind of concepts that we focus on a lot are validity and reliability, which is a bit different to qualitative research, where the focus is on credibility and trustworthiness. So they use different sort of concepts to measure the quality of the research, and that's what the concepts of validity and reliability are doing. They're speaking to the quality of the research design. And then I've classified the later stages of design as being data collection could have been put under the middle stage, but there's a reason for I've just structured it according to what I think will be the timing. So it's data capture and analysis and interpretation and reporting. So that's where we'll look at how you can support the students in terms of making sure their data collection works as much as you can, and what kinds of analysis you might be able to do, making sure you're doing the right kind of analysis and reporting it correctly. And then throughout the program, there's a cross-cutting theme of evaluating the research design. So you'll see a lot of the activities will relate to evaluating the work that the student has done. Finding tools for yourself which will allow you to evaluate the work that the student is doing. These are the sort of potential outcomes where you would be able to list the main components of quantitative research design. So throughout the journey, there's a range of components or elements that you need to know about and need to support the student on. So, for example, when they develop a research proposal, they need to pose research questions. Not all disciplines do that, but that's one of the things that I think is fairly important for a research proposal, is to have a set of research questions which you need to answer. So you need to get some ideas about, you need to have a good understanding about what a good research question might be, or how to support the students in terms of asking research questions. Then the second thing is to describe the main components of the quantitative research design. So not just listing them, but be able to describe them. So that's sort of defining and describing the components. And then you need to demonstrate your ability to apply resources and tools to support students towards improving their quantitative research design. So for the first activity or first assignment, I'm going to give you a resource to use and ask you to use it to review a student's research proposal. So that's so it's taking or identifying a tool that you might be able to use to evaluate research, and then use that for a proposal, a student proposal. Also to differentiate between weak and strong quantitative research design. So there's obviously good designs and poor designs. And it's part of that's where your knowledge comes in, of improving your knowledge about quantitative research in order to identify where there's weak and strong designs. And that's where issues of reliability and validity would come in, for example. So if you did a measurement of reliability and found that it was a weak reliability, then you would know that that was a weak design, for example. Then you're going to be asked to compile and use a set of resources and tools to support students for their quantitative research design. That's assignment 3. I haven't got that online yet, but that's what you're going to be doing for assignment 3. That's the exam equivalent as well. So I think it's quite a nice thing for you to be able to do, and you'll be able to use it after the program. So it's something that you're going to be able to take forward into the future once you've got that portfolio of resources and tools. Then this is something that you need to do, is to demonstrate commitment to improving and mentoring, then your mentoring and evaluation of students for their design. And then to complete a critical review of a quantitative research design performed by a student. So that's partly what we're doing in assignment 1 as well. So it's reviewing the work and then sort of critiquing it at the same time. All right, so this is a 200 credit module, which will be presented via Blackboard. Sorry, it's not by Blackboard, it's Moodle now, I beg your pardon. And it's, I still get confused between the two. And then it's Moodle and Teams. And then there's 6 online sessions and self-directed learning. There's 3 assignments. So the first 2 assignments are worth 60 marks, and the third assignment is 80 marks, and that's the exam equivalent. And then there'll also be, you might also need to do homework, and there'll be a discussion board where if there's topics for discussion, that can go onto the discussion board and you can contribute to that. We've run the program before, and we had more assignments and more activities, but because the program has been compressed into a very short space of time, I've reduced the number of assignments just to make it more manageable. So you're not worrying about sort of 10 or 15 things. You're only going to be worrying about 3 things. And just also to point out that because the program is so compressed, things are going to happen very quickly. So just bear that in mind. And theoretically, if you take into account the 200 credits, it means that you should be spending a number of hours a day on the module for the period of time that we are running the module. But that's if you're working and doing other things. I think some of you are finishing other modules. It's going to be, you might have some conflicts with time there. So I think part of assignment 3 is to develop something which you would be able to use later. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to contact you in 6 months' time or a year's time. 6 months is better, and say, how have you applied your assignment? So it won't be used for assessment or anything. But it's just to do a follow-up to see that you're actually applying the tools that you learned from the program, from the course. And that will help contribute towards the time that you should be spending on the module. Okay, so we've got 6 contact sessions. They're on Wednesdays and Saturdays. The contact sessions are from 5 to 7 on Wednesdays, and then from 9 to 4 on Saturdays. And then obviously on the Saturday one, we will have a break. I think today we might not have a break because I'm already running out of time. And then, but we do need to have a break on the Saturday sessions just because they're very long. We don't want to be sitting there for sort of 6 or 7 hours. The assignments are due on the 20th of September, the 4th of October, and the 25th of October. So just bear those dates in mind. And as I say, things are going to happen quite quickly over a short space of time. So just bear that in mind, and just put the effort in. A little bit every day helps. That's what they say. One of the piece of advice for students to try and finish their degrees is to work a little bit every day on your project. Right. Okay. I just want to make a note about the references. So a lot of the references I'm using are sort of classic texts, research texts, which are published on a regular basis. They're republished on a regular basis. So I have the original copies, which are older. I have the original copies of those books, and so I use those but there are newer editions. So for example, one of the books that we use a lot is a book called the SPSS Survival Guide. And that book, the version I have is an old publication of it, but they republish it every few years. So although the references might look a bit old, they're not. They're actually they're republished, and there'll be a newer version for most of them. And I'll also be sharing some newer references with you as we go through the program. So, for example, there's a nice reference on conceptual and theoretical frameworks, which is I found recently, which I'll share with you when we get to that session. Okay, I want to talk about assignment 1. So that's the first assignment, and you should start on that straight away. So what you need to do for this assignment is this assignment is sort of testing your role as the supervisor as being a reviewer or evaluator. So, and to use a tool to evaluate or review the work of a student. So this is what assignment 1 is expecting you to do. So what I've done is I've given you a chapter by Research Design called Research Design by Sharon Anderson Daniels. And the chapter is from a book called The Reviewer's Guide to Quantitative Methods in the Social Sciences. So don't worry too much about the social sciences. The book is most of the chapters in the book are actually statistical procedures that we use for statistical analysis. And each chapter explains how the statistical procedure works and what the kind of key criteria are for you that you need to meet in order to use the method. So it's actually quite a technical book for a number of the chapters. But this chapter that I've given you is a more general chapter on research design, and that's what we're dealing with in this first sort of unit of the program. So it's a very good book if you're doing statistical analysis or statistical based research, and you want to know about let's say confirmatory factor analysis as a procedure. This book has a chapter on that procedure and explains how it works and explains what the key things are that you need to look out for if you're using that particular statistical procedure. This chapter that I've given you is on research design, which is a more general it's a more general sort of theme. It's not a specific statistical test, but it provides you with a list of desiderata, which are sort of criteria that you would need to consider if you're reviewing the research design of a student's work, for example, or it could be a colleague's work. For the assignment, so in the chapter, Danielle gives a number of desiderata, but I'm only asking you to look at 6 of those, not all of them. So I think there's 11, but I'm only asking you to choose 6 for the assignment to make it more manageable. So the desiderata that you need to look at are the following. So the research design. So what you're going to need to do here is take a student proposal. So you need to find a student proposal. If you can't find one, then ask me and I'll provide you with one. I'll try and find one in your discipline for you to look at. But you should be able to find a proposal in your discipline for a student. It can be an honours proposal or a master's proposal, even a PhD proposal. And then the desiderata that I've asked you to look at are the research design is foreshadowed and follows logically from the general problem statement and associated research questions. The research problem is clearly articulated and researchable. The research design is appropriate to address the research problem and is clearly articulated. The variables are identified and operationalized. Sampling, instrumentation, procedures, and data analysis are detailed. So that's what you would be looking for in a proposal. You'd be looking to see whether the variables have been identified and operationalized. And although that seems fairly obvious, we review students' proposals every day on a daily basis. I reviewed 2 this morning. And those, one of the proposals hadn't really sort of identified the variables or operationalized them in any sort of meaningful way in the proposal. You could work it out from what was there, but it wasn't specified in the proposal. And often the data analysis sections in students' proposals are often very weak because they haven't had much experience with data analysis. So they don't, they just sort of make, when we get to that section of the course, you'll see some of the comments that students make in their data analysis section, which is not appropriate. It's not strong enough. And then, is the research design internally consistent? So is the data analysis consistent with the sampling procedures? And then, are the limitations of the design articulated and appropriately addressed? So what you would need to do is go through the student proposal, read Danielle's, and then she goes into detail about each of these components. So for example, in one of the sections, she talks about the types of research questions that somebody could ask in a proposal or in a thesis, for example. And so what you could do is identify whether the student has or has not asked research questions to begin with, or have they identified a research problem? Is it clearly articulated if there is one? Sometimes they're not. And then sort of just sort of extract the information about the research questions or the research problem, and then comment on the quality of what the student has presented. If there's nothing there, then it's easier to then that's fairly easy to comment on, because instead they didn't have any research questions, and this is what they could have done. But if they have done something, they might have done it incorrectly as well. So it's a question of reviewing the work that the student has done. Obviously, if you choose a poorer quality proposal, you'd have more to say. But you can also choose a stronger proposal and still identify the criteria that you're looking for, or the elements that you're looking for, and then critique them. So what you need to do is summarize how the student has addressed each of the desiderata. And obviously, if they haven't addressed it, then you can note that and explain how they could have addressed it. And then you can focus on specific elements that Anderson Daniels has identified. And then you can sort of use that for your analysis of the proposal. I think what I'm going to do is I might give you an example of a couple of things just to help you along with this, just to make sure that you're on the right track. Because I'm assuming I do this all the time, so I'm assuming that other people will be able to do it as well. But I might be making the wrong assumption on that. So what I might do is give you an example of a proposal with and explain what I mean by taking some points from the Daniels chapter to work with in terms of the proposal. Okay, so is there a question or yeah, so there is one assignment available under Moodle at the moment, and I'm going to I want you to get started on assignment 3 almost immediately as well. So I'll prepare that for you for Monday next week, I think, or maybe even by Saturday if possible. But I don't want you to end up doing too much at the same time. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of examples from what I mean by extracting the information from the proposal and using information from Anderson Daniels. And the rubric for this exercise is based on each question. So each question, there's 6 questions here. So the rubric is based on how well you answer each of the questions. The rubrics will vary depending on what we're doing, but for this particular activity, I've used a rubric based on each question. So if you don't answer the question at all, if you don't attempt to answer or identify what let's say, for example, we use desiderata 4. If you don't speak to that question, then you won't get a mark for that component. If you if you describe what's there or part of what's there, then you would get a sort of a lower mark. And if you describe what's there and critique it, then you'll get a better mark, obviously. So that's the way it's going to work in terms of marking that. Okay. And then so then you'd submit that with the proposal and and your document where you've responded to the assignment. That would go on to Moodle for assessment. Okay. All right. So in this session, the main focus I want to focus on this evening is research philosophy. So that's the question I would ask is, first question, what is your philosophy in life? If you think about that question, what is your philosophy in life? How would you answer that question? You answer that in the chat. So what is your philosophy in life? Yes, the philosopher is going to talk.
I'll keep it short.
Yeah.
I'll keep it short.
Yes. Yeah.
So in life, my philosophy is with enough chances, everyone can learn something. I just feel like and alongside that, I also have that we do not always get the students that we want, but whatever students we get, we produce them, we make them become what they should be. As in, if you're training them to become a philosopher, you won't get a philosopher at first. So you deal with whatever kind of student you have, and you mold them into what they should be. We all expect students that are already molded, and we don't get that, obviously. In South Africa, there's so much inequality. Yeah, but that's just my philosophy.
Good. Okay. Thank you. I'm hearing being okay, goes right. Live a life of integrity, alignment, and what I think, say, and do. Yes, good. Okay, that's nice. Any other comments on what is your philosophy in life? Okay, I'm going to ask you another question. Okay, maybe that's something you should think about more generally. So how do you view research, and how would you describe your belief system? So these are two more questions. I borrowed these from Prof. Vanessa Sherman, who was a facilitator of this module a few years back. So I'm just using her questions to get into this theme of philosophy. So how do you view research, and how would you describe your belief system? You can put up your hand or type in the chat. Anybody out there? So how do you view research, and how would you describe your belief system? Okay, okay, my research has to add value to knowledge and be impactful. Yes, that's a good answer. Research is something one should love and both hate. You cannot be indifferent. Yeah, okay. It is something that would elicit positive and negative feelings, definitely. And the point of research is that it should add value to our society, basically, and how we go about our lives. So it should have to add value to knowledge and be impactful. Okay, I used to view research as a difficult process, but I now believe it's just something that requires time, discipline, and interest. Okay, so it was viewed as difficult. But that's good. Okay. Right, so let's go on. You can keep adding comments if you want to. So the reason why I'm raising this issue of philosophy, is that this is the research onion from a very short paper by I think it's Lewis and Saunders. I can't remember who it is by now. And I find this quite a useful diagram to use for structuring the research methods section of a dissertation or of a proposal, because it gives you it gives you the layers of research. And we'll look at another diagram a bit later, which also gives you a structure to work from. So at the outer level is the research philosophy. And then there's the next layer, and is the methodological choice. And then you've got a research strategy, and then you've got the time frame, and then you've got the data collection and data analysis techniques and procedures. So I want to focus on this outer layer, which is research philosophy. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, and I'll explain why when we get to the end of the what I can show you about it. I think Dr. Shabangu might get cross with me, but but I'll explain what I mean in terms of the research philosophy, because philosophers would be obviously interested in the role that philosophy plays. But there is a question about the extent to which you need to deal with it in a project. So and then we're going to drill down to these lower levels as we go through the module. So in the first unit, we're going to deal with these three outer layers, which are the sort of focus of the type of research that you can do and the kind of strategy. And you'll see quantitative as one of those. And we're also going to look at a little bit of mixed methods as well, because mixed methods contains a quantitative component. And never during this program am I suggesting that quantitative is better than qualitative, or that qualitative research doesn't have a role. I just need to make that very clear as well. Qualitative research is very important, and it stands just as important as quantitative research. That we just do them differently. So that's the key thing to remember. Just a note of interest: the strategy level is something that students often leave out of their proposal. So they don't sort of explain whether they're doing an experimental design or a survey design, that kind of thing. And that's why I think this is a good resource to use for structure in terms of structuring your research design. Okay, so in terms of philosophy, ontology is what we know. So it's the study of being or existence, and its basic categories and relationships, and it seeks to determine what entities can be said to exist and how those entities can be grouped according to similarities or differences, or what the relationships are between those entities. So ontology is about it's about the topic essentially. And then there's also what we call epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. So it's how we know what we know. And those two both of these kind of terms belong to in the area of philosophy, and it's important to sort of understand what the difference between ontology and epistemology is. Epistemology really relates strongly to research and how we know about things. Ontology is more related to the topic in question that you're focusing on. So I quite like this. It's not exactly it doesn't, this diagram, which is from there's a very good writer called Hart who has a text on doing a literature review, and he also writes about research, doing research. And this in the diagram on the left there's topic literature, which is to do with the topic that you're studying. And then on the right, there's methodological literature, which is about the methodology that you might want to use for your study. And in some ways, it's not exactly directly related, but the idea of topic is more related to ontology, and then the methodological literature is more related to the epistemology of how we know what we know. So when you're doing a project, you'll need to, obviously you'd know this, that you need to deal with literature which is related to the topic. And that's where you get your theories and your concepts and so on from. And then you get your methodological literature, which is where you get an understanding of what kind of methods we use to research a particular problem. So your statistics, for example, would come up under the methodological literature, whereas what we know about a particular topic will come out under the topic literature. Okay, and you can use both of those sets of literature to identify gaps, which is where you get your problem from. So we'll come back to this a bit later. So we're in terms of quantitative and qualitative research, just to, and it's not always a good idea to separate them out into two separate entities, and that's not the purpose of this. It's just to say that there's two broad approaches to doing research. So in terms of the ontological question, you would ask the question, what is the nature of reality? And the quantitative answer to that would be reality is objective and singular, and it's apart from the researcher. So the researcher is separate from the reality. The qualitative answer to that is that the reality is subjective and multiple, as seen by participants in a study. And so they're very different approaches. So one speaks to this idea of objectivism, and the other speaks to this idea of subjectivism. So that would be the ontological underpinning of the different approaches. So if you're doing quantitative research, and it comes back to that idea of what is your philosophy, what do you think about research, those kinds of questions. How do you see the world? And that would be, if you think in the way of things are objective and you can measure things in a very objective way, then you would be more aligned to being a quantitative researcher. If you think that there's multiple realities and that the way we understand things is through individual differences, everybody's different in how they see something, then you'd fit better in a qualitative sort of framework, if that makes sense. So that's why we ask that question: what is your philosophy? How do you think about research? Because that's going to determine how well you fit into the quantitative or the qualitative paradigm. Then we have epistemological assumptions. So the question there is, what is the relationship of the researcher to that which is being researched? And if you're a quantitative, the answer to that question from a quantitative perspective is the researcher is independent from that being researched, whereas qualitative is the researcher interacts with that being researched. So again, if you believe that you can be objective and be apart from, say, you don't introduce any bias to the research that you're doing, then you might sort of fit well with the quantitative paradigm. If you believe that the researcher interacts with introduces bias into the research context, and that influences what we see and what we measure, then you would fit better into a qualitative paradigm. Then we've got the axiological assumption, which speaks to the role of values. Quantitative is value-free and unbiased. Qualitative is value-laden and biased. And that's why we have different measures for quality of research in quantitative versus qualitative. So when because we're making this assumption that quantitative research is value-free and unbiased, we can measure reliability and validity. Because in qualitative research, we're making the assumption that it's value-laden and biased, we speak of things like trustworthiness and credibility as measuring the quality of the research. So that's why we have these different sort of concepts that we worry about. The language, the rhetorical assumption, which is the language of research. Quantitative language is formal. It's based on a set of definitions. It's in personal voice. When you write up a quantitative project, you don't sort of bring yourself into the project, and you use quantitative words or statistical words. So we talk about correlation and regression, those kinds of things. Qualitative writing or language is more informal. It's involves the personal voice more, and then there'll be sort of recognized qualitative words that are more likely to be used there. Then the methodological assumption, what is the process of research? Under quantitative research, it's going to be a deductive process. And not always, but again, for all of these sort of issues that we discuss, it's never going to be one, or there's always going to be some exceptions, or there's always going to be an exception to the definition, or to the definitions that we, or the sort of theories that we, or to the definitions and the words that we're using. So for quantitative research, the process would be deductive, whereas qualitative would be inductive. And with a quantitative project, you're usually testing a theory, and you're going to measure the quality through reliability and validity. Whereas with qualitative research, normally you start with collecting information about a problem, and then you develop the theory usually from that process of data collection. But there's always exceptions to that rule, so it's not a black or white kind of definition here. Yeah. Then this comes back to your what is your philosophy about life? So the researcher's worldview. If you're working in the quantitative paradigm, you would be comfortable with the ontological, epistemological, axiological, and rhetorical and methodological assumptions of the quantitative paradigm. And the same would apply for the qualitative, which has a different set of answers to the questions about ontological, epistemological, axiological, and so on assumptions. So it gives this to give you the idea that you might be more orientated towards one or the other kind of approach, and that would and there's no reason why you can't be there's no reason why you can't work in both paradigms, but you might have to wear a different hat when you move from one to the other. So that's the idea behind this. So the training and experience that you need if you're working in the quantitative paradigm is you would need technical writing skills, computer statistical skills, and library skills. And if you are working in the qualitative paradigm, you would need more literary writing skills. You'd need text analysis skills, could be computer-based or paper-based, and then you would need library skills. So all kind of research would need library skills. All research needs some kind of writing skills, but the writing will be different depending on which paradigm you're working in. And then psychological attributes, again, it comes back to this, how do you view research and so on. If you're comfortable with the rules and guidelines for conducting research, if you have a low tolerance for ambiguity, and if you have time for a study of a short duration, then you would fit well with the quantitative paradigm. And then the qualitative paradigm would work a little bit differently, because you would need, for example, you'd need a high tolerance for ambiguity if you're working in the qualitative area. And it might take you longer to do the research because it's a different kind of process. So, for example, if you're doing anthropological-based research, it usually takes much longer than if you're doing a study where you kind of trying to do a quick quantitative analysis of what's going on in a business, for example. So that short duration, long duration is not necessarily always linked to the methodology either. You can get very long quantitative studies and you can get quite short qualitative studies. So it's not, but in general, I think the idea would be that it's quantitative projects could be shorter and the qualitative projects could be normally longer. And part of that reason is the qualitative project is trying to get a depth of understanding of a situation, and it takes longer if you're trying to get detailed understanding of a situation, it would take longer. Okay. The reasons for selecting a paradigm, if a problem has been studied before, and there's a sort of well-established body of literature, and you know what the variables are, and there's existing theories, then you could choose a quantitative paradigm. If your research is exploratory, if the variables are unknown, and if there's no theory base for the study, then you would probably start with a qualitative design. And then the audience it would be the individuals who are accustomed to or support quantitative studies, or if you're doing a qualitative study, it would be those individuals accustomed to or supportive of qualitative studies. And there is a kind of distinction. So I think sometimes when you look at journals, for example, they will be more quantitatively orientated or more qualitatively orientated, even disciplines. So in the work that we do at StatCon, we support all faculties at UJ, but there's some faculties that we never see. So their students don't come to us for support because they don't do quantitative work. I won't mention them by name here, but there's some disciplines which do much more quantitative work than others. And I don't think that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't think it's good that a discipline only uses quant or qual research. I think it's good for disciplines to use all kinds of research. But the reality is there's certain sort of power bases within disciplines which would say it's better to use quantitative, it's more reliable and more valid, and therefore we must use this kind of research. So but I don't agree with that approach. I think all research paradigms are useful for answering or for solving problems. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail about these specific worldviews, but again, this comes to it comes down to that question again: what is your philosophy? And this is more in the context of research, not in general. So this is from a book by Huff called Designing Research for Publication, which is also a good text for researchers. And I'm only showing you this, just the reason why I'm showing you this is to demonstrate that there's different worldviews about how we can go about doing research and the thinking behind that. So in this case, there's a rationalist formalist view. The ontology behind that is that the world is intelligible and orderly. The epistemology is that logic is a source of knowledge, independent of intuition and deduction. And the focus of the scholarly activity for that particular school is reason deductive description. For a quantitative design, something like a logical positivist view would be relevant. The world is orderly and can be reduced to elementary concepts and rules. Its nature can be described without emotive concepts. The epistemology, the only authentic knowledge is scientific knowledge, and that can only come from positive affirmation of theories through strict scientific method. So that approach excludes a more qualitative approach where you might not use you might be doing something more qualitative where you don't have strict use of the scientific method. And the focus of scholarly activity for the logical positivist is theories are reduced to the truths of logic and mathematics, coupled with propositions referring to sense experience. So a qualitative project wouldn't do that. They wouldn't sort of use statistics, for example. So that kind of approach would be excluded from that particular school of thought. The pragmatism is related to mixed methods, so we'll come back to that a bit later. So these are other kinds of worldviews that you can use for research design. So there's critical theorist that would involve Marxist theory, for example, and then there's the feminist worldview. Those would be more associated with, the feminist worldview might be more associated with qualitative design. Marxist critical theorists can be quite quantitative in nature, so it's not doesn't necessarily exclude quantitative design, but it has a particular approach to thinking about the world. So that would be it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean it excludes quantitative information though. The postmodernist is sort of the antithesis of the quantitative design. The ontology there is that the world is transient, ephemeral, and emergent. The epistemology is knowledge and power are fragmented. Local assemblages of organizings collectively make up social reality. And the focus of scholarly activity is polyphonic, juxtaposed readings and writings, a chorus of narratives. So that's very far away from statistics. It's on the other sort of end of the spectrum from statistics, where you play with varied perspectives. The scientific realist would be much more linked to quantitative design. But acknowledging that under the epistemology, acknowledging that scientific methods can be fallible and most scientific knowledge is approximate. So it's sort of asking questions about how valid and reliable scientific information is. Okay, and critical realism is also a very interesting worldview. So have a that allows for some information to be, some data to be kind of real or accurate, and then other data not to be accurate, for example. So it's an interesting view, that it's an interesting worldview which allows for maybe a combination of quantitative and qualitative. And they usually use a combination of quantitative and qualitative data for critical realist analysis. Okay, then in terms of trying to understand all of these ontologies and epistemologies and so on, it can be very confusing when you read the literature. And so from my experience of reading the literature is that the authors sometimes classify the different epistemologies and ontologies in different ways. So for example, Huff, for example, talks about worldviews and gives these different worldviews in terms of ontology and epistemology. Reeves and Hedberg, there's authors called Reeves and Hedberg who've got a paper, it's a chapter on evaluation research, and they kind of identify four main approaches to doing research. One which is sort of positivist quantitative, one which is interpretivist qualitative. And then they have a critical theory, which is the neo-Marxist postmodern. And then they have what they call a pragmatic or eclectic mixed methods. So they've got four main designs that they focus on for which are underpinned by these different philosophies. And then Crotty has a book on research philosophy where he kind of groups he refers to objectivism, constructivism, and subjectivism as being epistemology. And then he talks about positivism and interpretism and so on as being a theoretical perspective. So it's sometimes quite difficult to unpack where these things belong in terms of categorizing them. But the main point is the student might need to know which ontology and epistemology they are using for their research design. Okay. I'm not going to go into detail about all of these, but these are the quantitative paradigms. Positivism would be one of them, and that refers to a branch of philosophy that rose to prominence during the early 19th century, and it assumes that reality exists independently of humans, so we can measure things in a very objective way. So that's what the kind of idea of positivism is. We don't influence what we're measuring. so the ontological position of positivists is that of realism. So that this idea of we have this reality that we can measure. There is a cause-effect relationship between phenomenon. Therefore, we can make predictions. So because there is this cause-effect relationship between different constructs or variables, we can predict the relationship between variables. Also, reality is context-free, which is not actually necessarily a kind of a true statement, and that's why we have alternatives to positivism. Researchers are objective observers, so that's where objectivism comes in. So you can look at a problem without influencing it, and then the final sort of definition of positivism would be there's laws governing social phenomenon. So the positivist would believe that there are certain laws underpinning the social phenomenon that we see, or the phenomenon that we see in society. And I think that's I think for certain kinds of things certain kinds of phenomenon, a lot of these criteria could be true, and that's why positivism is a successful paradigm. Post-positivism emerged as a result of criticism of positivism, and it attempts to address the weaknesses of the positivist paradigm. So if somebody is using a quantitative design, they're probably coming from a post-positivist position, because of the recognition that the positivist position was too narrow and too constrained. So the ontological position is critical realism. So I mentioned in this Huff chapter, the critical realist view allows for some data, or some data to be accurate and other data to not be accurate in terms of measurement. And that's what the critique of the positive position would be, is that not everything can be based in realism, and we can't be objective about everything. It still would say that reality exists independent of the observer, but the possibility exists now that the researcher's beliefs and values can affect what's being observed. So what that means is that when you design a project, for example, you might influence what's going to be measured, and that would then have you bring in a bias to the sort of it might not be a completely accurate picture of what's out there, because the researchers bringing in their own beliefs and values, and that it's quite easy to think of examples of that. So if you think about COVID, for example, there was a lot of debate during COVID about whether the right decisions were made in terms of policy and practice and so on. And people are bringing in their values. People bring in their values, which then influences the data that they use, and that in turn influences what decisions are made in terms of policy and practice. So there's different positions. People have different positions about what the right and wrong thing to do is. So it's quite easy to find examples of where what we believe and what we value affects what we measure. The way post-positivism would work is based on hypotheses. So normally we state a hypothesis. It could be as a proposition or a question about the causal relationship between phenomena. And we'll look at that in more detail when we look at in the next session. We're going to look at theoretical propositions. The evidence is gathered and then it's analyzed, so a theory can be formulated that explains the effect of an independent variable on a dependent variable. And that's a deductive approach. And the purpose is to measure, control, predict, or construct laws and ascribe causality. So when we're doing that particular approach, we're kind of arguing that we can look at causal relationships and we can measure the variables which tell us about the causality between variables. The alternative paradigm in qualitative research is interpretivism, and that's part of the kickback against positivism. So we need alternatives to the quantitative positions. So I'm not going to go into detail about this because we're not focusing on qualitative research, but the idea here is that there's no single verifiable reality, and we construct multiple realities. So there isn't a single reality to be measured. And truth and reality are created, not discovered. This is a subjectivism, so epistemology is subjective and our worldviews matter. Research has become part of the social reality, and that influences what we measure, and so on. So, and this is an inductive approach. So it's kind of like the opposite of the quantitative post-positivism approach. And then mixed methods, which we would call pragmatic, bring together the two approaches. So each quantitative and qualitative research have strengths and weaknesses, and the strength of the one is the weakness of the other, and vice versa. So the mixed methods tries to address those weaknesses by bringing the two types of design, or the two approaches together. And so you need to usually it's used in a situation where it's quite a pragmatic problem that needs to be solved, and that's why it's called pragmatic research. So you have to bring together both the philosophies behind both the quantitative and the qualitative in order to use mixed methods. So this is pragmatism, and the idea here is that there can be single or multiple realities that are open to empirical inquiry. All research is going to involve some empirical measurement. So irrespective of whether you're doing a quantitative or a qualitative project, there's going to be some kind of empirical measurement. It's just whether you start with a theory or end with a theory will sort of decide which way it is. So that's the mixed methods. And then this is I'm going to go through this, but this is another example of a publication where the authors are talking about the different research paradigms that the student could use for their research. So this could also be a tool that you might be able to use if the student needs to know about the different approaches. So this is a nice diagram which kind of covers the three of the approaches. There is another approach as well. So where you've got somebody saying qualitative methods are the best, quantitative methods are the best, and then mixed methods could be the best. And then the question is, are you going to kind of choose one approach, or which approach are you going to use to solve the problem that you're trying to investigate? And it could be that the quant or the qual is better. Sometimes we get projects where the student is doing a quantitative project, but a qualitative approach would be better for them to use because not much is known about the problem or the context that they're studying. So it hasn't been looked at before, but they're doing a quant because that they want to learn the methodology, and that's kind of I think that's the wrong approach to use. Is it's better to use the methodology should fit with the problem rather than the problem. So the problem should drive the research rather than the methodology, if that makes sense. Okay, this is another diagram. I mentioned a diagram earlier. So this is another diagram which looks at in some ways this is similar to the research onion. But it's using the analogy of a tree. So you've got at the base of the tree or under the tree where the roots are, you've got the paradigm, and that could be pragmatism or interpretivism or post-positivism. The post-positivism would be the quantitative paradigm there. So that's the paradigm provides the base structure for your design for the project. So that's it's a question of that's your philosophy in that sense is what's going to determine the rest of the choices that are made in terms of the design. The second level is the methodology, the general problem-solving methodology. So you've got mixed methods, qualitative or quantitative. So that would be the second layer of the research onion from the other diagram. And obviously for this program, we're focusing on quantitative and mixed methods designs. The third level is the purpose. So what's the purpose of the research? Do you need to know something? Do you need to choose something? Do you need to do something? And that will determine the kind of that will determine the kind of strategy or the approach that you use to the research. And then there's at the lowest level, there's the procedures. So it's the sampling, the instruments that you're going to use to collect data, the data collection and the analysis. But the point about this is that the paradigm provides the underlying support for the design. And if you're doing a quantitative project or a mixed methods, if you're doing a quantitative project, you would probably be using the post-positivist paradigm. And if you're doing a mixed methods, you'll probably be using the pragmatic design. Sorry, the pragmatic paradigm. So that's the kind of starting point where the student is coming into the philosophy that they're using. Just to say that the underlying the philosophy or the paradigm is we use the different techniques that we use. So we can use the different methodologies and strategies and methods to meet the different scientific needs. So you've got, under pragmatism, you could use, obviously they'd be using mixed methods probably, but then beyond that, we'll be using the same set of tools to maybe answer within those different paradigms and the different methodologies. Except we won't, if there's certain kind of tools which would be more associated with quantitative or qualitative techniques and their approaches, and then we'll talk about those more later on as well. Okay, so the question really is how much philosophy should be included in a student's proposal or thesis? So that's the question I'm going to ask you now, is when the student writes their proposal or their thesis, how much philosophy should be included in that thesis? And I'm going to tell you the answer that I was given when I did my PhD. So at the university, or in the department that I was working in. So what do you think should be the answer to that question? How much research philosophy should be included in a student's proposal or in their thesis? And you can just answer lots or a moderate amount or a little or none. Yes, Wiseman.
Afternoon, colleagues, or should I say, good evening? It's almost 7 o'clock.
Yes,
in terms of the philosophy on a student proposal or thesis, I also could say it could be moderate, but also it depends on the paradigm. Is it quantitative? Is it qualitative? Is it a mixed method paradigm that they are using in their study? And it also depends on the topic in itself. Is it a topic that is measuring something, or is it more of a topic from an activist stance of what the student is researching on? Because then if it's more of an activist stance, it would need the voice of the student. If the student cannot do some form of bracketeering where they suspend or put away their subjectivities and biases in their research. So I think it depends on the type of research that the student is tackling and influenced by the problem that they are focusing on. Is it self-study? Then obviously it's going to need a lot of activist and first voice. But then is it some hypothetical research? It's going to need the philosophy to be much more moderate and neutral. Thank you.
Thank you. Devashri?
Thanks. So I think in a proposal, it could be quite moderate, where they need to identify the philosophical orientation and be able to justify why that particular orientation and perhaps talk about the applicability of it. I do think that when you are working with PhD, especially the thesis, that it needs to be more extensive, because that really does, show the inclination of the researcher in terms of the engagement with its knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. So to answer the question, when I did my PhD, we were advised, we did some courses when we started the program, and the question came up in one of the workshops: how much research philosophy should you include in your dissertation? And the answer was none. so it's very interesting but I think it's and another question I should ask is, when you read a science paper, a paper that's published by a scientist, how much detail do they go into about the research philosophy behind the research that they're doing? And the answer there would probably be none as well. So the scientists are very, they don't talk about the philosophy because it's an integral part of what they do, and it's part of the scientific method basically. So they're much more confident about, because they're working in this sort of post-positivist paradigm. They don't have debates in their research about the paradigm that they're using. They just use it, and that's they don't sort of have much discussion about it. But having said that, I think in other disciplines there would be an expectation that there would be more information, more content about the philosophy. Sorry, there's three. Wiseman, did you have something? I'm going to just go through the hands in order. Wiseman, was that a legacy hand?
No, it's not a legacy hand. I just wanted to ask in terms of the philosophy, the beliefs, and maybe the positionality of the student in the thesis. So maybe from a position of wanting maybe social transformation in the university, how much of the first voice or the beliefs can one bring in their study? Because I had an experience where my language editor was like, no, you cannot say that the research that you are doing demands you to be on the side of the participants, and you cannot suspend your subjectivity. You are using your subjectivities in the research because it stains the data. So I was kind of struggling in terms of what to do there in terms of my philosophy. Maybe colleagues can give me clarity in that case.
Yeah, I think just to answer you, I think it depends on the discipline again. So, and there would be some disciplines would, I think, as I said about the language that researchers use when they're writing about their research. In the science discipline, they tend to be very, they don't bring in the I and talk about what I did or this is what I did for my research. It's very neutral and sort of scientific and inverted commas. Whereas in the social sciences, there's much more openness towards, but talking about what you did or the role that your kind of experience played in the process. So and the role that you play in the research as a researcher. And that's so I think it's, but we'll also talk about that a bit more later on as well. So I think that might help you answer. But I think it's often discipline specific as to how you write about the research and the role that the role that you played in the research process as well. Sorry, I'm not sure who was next. Devashri?
Thanks. So I come from sociology, the discipline of sociology. So in the social sciences, our philosophical stance is very, very crucial.
Yeah.
Especially if you're examining theses or proposals, we really do tend to focus on the philosophical stance in the methodology quite strongly. And it's supposed to have shaped the rest of the methodology and the design. But if it's not well pronounced initially, then we actually raise a lot of questions around it. So for us, it's absolutely crucial. But you are absolutely right. When you're reading academic articles, we kind of integrate it into the theoretical aspects when we're looking at the design. So yeah, thanks.
I think it's definitely much more prevalent in the social sciences than in the science discipline. And it's not a critique of either discipline, whether it's good or bad. It's just interesting that the two sort of the two broad disciplines are quite different in how they sort of deal with philosophy and their disciplines. Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, just to chip in, I think, well, coming from philosophy, we basically depend on the student's ability to articulate arguments, to put out an evaluative stance when they do their research. But I do feel like the technical terms is what actually gets students lost. It's better to we've worked the system down to the point where we want students to be able to explain without just saying, okay, I'm going to be taking an ontological stance, or I'll be looking at it's better if students can use much more simpler language to articulate these terms instead of just hiding behind some of these terms as what most students do.
Yeah, I think a common problem with with student proposals and even with their dissertations is when they introduce the research philosophy and the design, is that it's like a textbook. So they say, I'm going to use this, but they don't explain how it actually works in terms of their project, or their topic. So they might say they're using the post-positivist approach, but then or philosophy, but then they don't say why it's relevant to their actual. For them, it's just like a description of what it is, but not actually integrating it or explaining how it relates to the work. Gabriel?
Thank you, Doc. I also, in fact, you have just said what I wanted to say, that more of the integration part of it, the students, they normally lack that. They just build another library of these philosophies and so on within their text, but without delving into the application part of it. How does that relate to the study that they are doing? And I also agree with from the consultations that we normally do. Sometimes we receive students who come from the natural sciences. They don't really care much about the philosophical underpinning of their study, but on the humanities, social science, it is a very important aspect, of the research that we do. That even sometimes when you write for publication, some journals, they don't even take accept the paper if there's no sort of theoretical underpinning of the study that you'll be doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't want to give the impression that scientists don't care about their philosophy, because that's not the case. So when I did my qualification in biology, for example, we did courses in philosophy of science as part of our degree. So it's not that they don't consider the philosophy. It's just that it's kind of part of what because it is this part of the scientific method, and it's part of the discipline. Obviously, they've had changes in how scientists see philosophy and so on. As, for example, this move from positivist to post-positivist. But it's much more integrated into the discipline, and sort of the assumption is that it's there, and it works, and it's satisfactory. So there isn't a lot of debate about changing it, for example. And that's there will still be debate about changing it as well, but I think it's not as kind of there's not as much debate in the science disciplines about research philosophy as there is in the social sciences, because there's more scope for different types of research designs, I think, in the social sciences than there is in the science disciplines. I think so. And that's one of the reasons why. But yeah, so it's not that they don't. I don't want to give the impression that scientists don't concern themselves with philosophy, but they have a good one, and they sort of tend to stick to that. So yeah. Okay, right. It's 10 to 7. I think I'm going to do the next exercise in the next class. So I think I'm going to use the next 10 minutes for questions for this session. And I think I'm going to do the other exercise at the beginning of the next class. I've got a short exercise to do, but I'll do that at the beginning of the next on Saturday. So let's use this time for questions and answers. So are there any questions relating to the course or to the issue of philosophy or to the different types of different approaches? Yes, Wiseman.
Just for clarity's sake, the proposal, you said you will give us a proposal to analyze in terms of what the student has done, or do we have to find our own proposal and then analyze?
I think what I would suggest is that if you can find one, because I think you need to choose a discipline-specific proposal. So it would be, if you can find a proposal, then find one. And then if you can't find one, then let me know, and I will, or maybe I can just provide a couple of proposals that you could work on if you can't find one yourself. That would be another option. But I think you'll be most comfortable working in your own discipline. So if you can, yeah.
Yeah, I have a proposal or proposals, but the problem is they are of a qualitative nature, since I'm a qualitative researcher myself.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So, and you don't think you'll be able to find one with a quantitative?
Let me try and do a background check, then I'll engage you if I'm finding a problem.
Yeah. Okay. I can try and find a couple, or just give a couple of different options if people can't find one.
Or maybe let's just leave it open in terms of having some of the proposals that you can share with us, maybe on the UJ model system, so that when we go in, maybe we find some of them and be able to analyze. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think that I'm sure a lot of you should be able to get access to proposals based on either your own supervision or somebody else's supervision in your department. Yeah, and I just think it'll be nicer for you to work on a proposal in your own discipline rather than another discipline, just because it adds another. If you're working in a proposal from another discipline, it adds to the complexity of the project. What's your discipline, Wiseman? What field are you working in?
Okay, I'm in the curriculum studies field.
Education.
Yes, education and curriculum studies.
Okay, that's fine. So, but something in education might work for you. Okay.
Yeah, because my problem with this side is that it's of a qualitative.
I understand. Okay. Okay. Tony.
Similarly to Wiseman, I'm coming from a similar background, but I have a different question. Mine is with regards to presentation. Will we have to do a presentation at this? At some point.
No.
Just to think about that in advance if we do.
No, you don't. There's no presentation. And I think some of the other modules have done presentations for assessment, but we're not doing one here. For this course, your main assignment will be a portfolio, not a presentation. Yeah, if that's Devashri.
Thanks. So I'm in a similar situation with my colleagues, is that I'm at a new university, and in the sociology department, we have basically qualitative proposals that have come through. I mean, I have access to proposals from a research committee, but they're in other disciplines.
Okay.
Yeah, so if there is something that's quantitative, we'd really appreciate it.
Okay, I'll try and find some. Okay, I should have one or two floating around. Okay, Lindiwe.
Thanks.
Okay, Dr. Davis, thanks for noting my hand. I wanted to find out if, just to confirm, so assignment 3 is the portfolio.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try and get that ready for you on Saturday. We've changed the course a bit from previously because of there's been a change in the structure of the program. So in order to meet the sort of shorter time frame and things happening in a narrower time frame, I've made some changes to the assessments and the way we do the assessments and so on, just to make it a bit easier. And that also knowing that you're going to be under tight deadlines by the end of the year. I've just tried to make something a bit different to what we've done before. So I'm just busy finalizing that. And also I wanted to do something where we'd be able to do a follow-up sometime down the line to find out if what we're doing here is actually being applied in the real world. Okay, because it doesn't form part of the assessment or anything, but I'd just be interested to know whether what we do now does translate into in a practical way into your supervision in the future, or even into your I think, okay, tourism and hospitality. Okay. Tourism and hospitality. Okay. All right, got that. Okay. All right, so I'll find some proposals, and then if you, and then I'll just let you, I might not be able to get proposals within the specific disciplines, depending on what discipline it is, but I'm sure we can find some. I'm sure I'll have some, and then what I'll do is I'm going to anonymize them. So you won't know who the person is, but it'll be a real proposal kind of thing. So yeah. Right. Okay. Any other questions? Any other issues? So we're looking for philosophy, sociology, curriculum development. Let's write that down.
Can I ask another question, just for clarity?
Yes. Yeah.
So assignment 3 is going to be a resource handbook, or is it going to be a portfolio? Because a portfolio does require some reflections,
it's going to be a portfolio. So what you're going to need to do is collect together a set of resources that you could use for your students. And then you're going to have to answer some questions about those resources. So that would be the kind of reflection part of it. So it's not, I don't think it's going to be too complicated or difficult. Okay. Information management field. Info and knowledge management. Okay.
Hi, Doc.
Yeah, sorry, Kenny. Yeah.
Yes, so thank you so much. And just a kind reminder, please don't forget to send us the example. You had said that you're going to send us an example of
of how to extract. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And okay, good. Okay, so for this first assignment, what you need to do is just read the chapter by Sharon Anderson Daniels. And it's the point of the chapter is it's like when you need to evaluate something, you try to use tools or resources that give you guidelines on what questions to ask, for example. And that's the point of using this chapter from this what I think is a very good book about reviewing quantitative research is to give you that set of questions. You might not like it. You might not think it's a good chapter, but I think there's a lot of useful suggestions in that chapter for what to look for in a good research design. And obviously, because the book is about quantitative research design, there will be some focus on that research, on quantitative sort of more quantitative focus. So it's a possible tool, but I'll be also giving you other tools that you could use to evaluate work with. And then you can look at those and decide whether you think they're useful or not. And you could include them in your portfolio, for example. So it's what you think is going to work for your particular discipline. But so across most disciplines, there's certain tools which would be quite useful for any discipline. And then there might be, I think it was Nicoline who mentioned that there's within her discipline, they use very specific tests, for example. So it might be that there needs to be a particular tool that she would need to use for that discipline, because so for example, in communication and languages, when they're analyzing text, they do it in a quantitative way, but they use a particular set of statistics, and there's special programs designed for that kind of analysis. It's not the kind of analysis that we would do in our that we would normally do in our sort of consultancy, for example, because not many people use it. So it's just kind of knowing which kind of whether there's more specialized kind of analysis that you would need to do, or whether it's more generic. So yeah. But we'll get to the analysis later on as well. So that'll be part of the program. Okay. All right, so we're after 7. I'm sure some of you want to go now. All right, so I'll follow up with the proposals and with the examples, and then I'll see you on Saturday. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye, colleagues.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
Dr.
everyone.
Debbie.
Thanks, Dr. Debbie.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Ay, esta se me valida. Se me valida.
Okay.